listening to episode 119 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing Maddy Rae Cooper. She has had a really interesting journey recovering from Lyme disease, using a copper IUD, and various other health challenges. In this episode, she shares what's worked for her to recover from those things. She actually used SOT, or supportive oligonucleotide therapy, for Lyme disease. And I'd never heard of that one, so that was really interesting for me because I've heard of frequency therapy and wild oregano therapy for Lyme disease, but I've never heard of this one. So she goes into detail of what that is, and she talks about the difference between a water-soluble antibiotic and a fat-soluble antibiotic, and how that has a different effect on the biofilm, which is like a shield that the Lyme spirochete hides behind. And I also ask her listener questions, including why does acne go away when someone cuts out dairy, best precautions to take for Lyme to prevent tick bites for humans or pets or farm animals. And we talk about pathogenic infections in general and the terrain versus the germ theory and how they could potentially both coexist at the same time. So here we go. Here is Maddy Rae Cooper. All right, we're here with Maddy Rae Cooper. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and talking about your journey. Sounds like you've been through a lot. The Lyme disease was the big one, right?
Lyme disease was definitely the big one. That was, really a 10-year long journey. But, overall, I'm grateful that it happened. I think everything happens for a reason. And now I'm here. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, I have some friends that I've met that have been healing from it, and they try all sorts of things, PEMF and bee venom therapy, getting stung by bees. There's so many different therapies, and I've heard Dr. Cass Ingram lecture in person multiple times and spoke with him one-on-one, and I think he's a really knowledgeable guy on Lyme disease. He wrote a book on it, and he's all about wild P73 oregano for it. But there's all these different perspectives of how to go about it, right?
Yes. Well, it's interesting because I got sick in, I think it was 2008 or 2009. And it's really, the alternative treatments have come so far since I was initially sick. So when I first got sick, it was antibiotics or nothing. And that was just the only thing. And they weren't even really doing IV antibiotics then. That was still kind of, it was extremely hard to get diagnosed with Lyme, mostly because insurance companies didn't want to pay for it. The treatments that, Lyme doctors recommended were always longer than, the 2-week doxycycline that, the CDC says is the thing. So it was really hard. I probably saw about a dozen doctors before I was able to even get diagnosed, even though I had right off the bat, fortunately, this isn't the case for a lot of people, but I had a very definitive rash, I had the joint pain, the brain fog, the, memory loss, the fatigue, all different kinds of hives, just all over my body. So I had kind of all the classic symptoms, and I would go in, I'm from Georgia, so I'm located next door to the CDC, and I was going to see all their, infectious disease professionals, and I would go in and they would say, oh, well, it looks like it's probably some form of tick-borne illness, probably Lyme disease. I would do the labs. My labs would come back negative, as happens to, probably half the people that get tested. And they would say, well, then we don't really know what it is. It's probably just a rash. Here's some prednisone. Go about your merry way. So it was very frustrating. And I got to a point where, I couldn't finish a sentence. I couldn't walk. I couldn't, at some points my body would just be in so much pain from the hives that I was in. That I would sit in the bathtub for like 5 hours and I couldn't sleep. I had terrible insomnia. But at the same time, I was exhausted. So I just had, it was hell. It was miserable. And my mom ended up doing research online and finding out that the best lab for Lyme research was IGeneX out in California. And she called them and asked, are there any doctors, any practitioners in the state of Georgia that send labs to you? And so that's how she found this doctor that was like maybe 3 hours away from us. And we ended up driving out to see this doctor. Immediately she saw me and said, it's a clinical diagnosis, it's Lyme disease. And she put me on antibiotics, and that's how I started treatment. And then I eventually got in to see Dr. Joseph Jemsek in Washington, D.C. He's a pediatric Lyme specialist. And so I was kind of being treated by both of these doctors, but it was all antibiotics. I was on tons of, like metronidazole, tetracycline, rifampin, and I'm going back now as I'm, older and I know more and I'm doing my research, looking at what all these antibiotics do. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like how did I not die from just the antibiotics that I was on? And I was on antibiotics for about 2 years consistently. Just wrecked my microbiome. So that was really tough. I ended up having all these food sensitivities. But eventually, I kind of sequestered the Lyme, I guess. And I would consider that going into like a remission, because I still wasn't completely okay, but I at least got ahead of it enough so that my body could kind of keep it sequestered. I wasn't having all of the terrible symptoms. I would have flare-ups occasionally, but I was mostly kind of doing okay. And then at that point is kind of when I started getting into the alternative health stuff, because I still wasn't better. I had all these food sensitivities. I went from just being a teenage kid that just ate whatever I wanted, and I probably ate Chick-fil-A 3 times a week, and I all of a sudden couldn't have gluten, couldn't have dairy, couldn't have most things. And so that's kind of how I got down the rabbit hole of trying all of the diets and doing all of the trends and the things, and going into those rabbit holes. I never did the bee venom. I'm a little disappointed about that. I feel like I missed out a little on the bee venom.
Yeah, it seems like it works. Years ago, I wanted to create a bee venom product. I was looking into that, but I think would have been easy to get sued. Something went wrong.
I definitely have done, all the bee pollen and the royal jelly and all of those things. And, I've followed you for a really long time. I remember you talking a long time ago about bee bread, and I started making bee bread and, doing all that. So lots of bee products. I love bees. I'd love to own bees one day, but no bee venom.
Yeah, I just ordered more. I think 6 pounds I'm getting in a few weeks. So I'm excited.
6 pounds of bees or bee products?
Of bees. They actually measure them in pounds. So like usually 3 pounds could start a hive.
Wow.
The classic style. Yeah.
So you can just start a bee venom like retreat and just send someone out into, your yard, and all right, there you go. Now pay me $500 or, however much.
I'll just throw them into the beehive. Yeah.
Right. Sure. The bees will love it. It'll be great.
So while you were on antibiotics, like, were you doing like the intermittent fasting thing, or like extreme?
I wasn't, fortunately, because that might have actually killed me. I didn't start intermittent fasting until after I was off the antibiotics. And, I got to a point in my antibiotic treatment that I just kind of had to stop because I had lost so much weight. I would wake up every morning and I would just drink half a bottle of Pepto-Bismol because I was just nauseous all the time. It was terrible. And I just looked kind of like a ghoul. Like it was so sad. And so I got to a point where I was like, I can't take these anymore. And I tried 2 different times to get off antibiotics. First time I stopped, my symptoms came back. So I went back on them for like another 2 months. And I just I could feel it. Like I could kind of feel when my immune system had it kind of under control. So I could go off the antibiotics, and I was kind of like, all right, it's hurting me more to stay on these antibiotics at this point. Mm-hmm. So that's when I got off the antibiotics. And then, I started, at first, I think I went raw vegan because I heard that was the best, and alkaline. And I was doing raw vegan and alkaline because that was the best for healing. And then I started doing the keto stuff and got really into like the Bulletproof Coffee and Dave Asprey, and was listening to his podcast and doing, all those things. And got super into that. I was also at that time, and this is all going through all this too. I'm going to college, I'm not sleeping in college. I'm partying. I'm doing all these things. I'm under so much stress. I finally ended up leaving college because I just kind of had a mental breakdown. I was on antidepressants, on the birth control pill, trying to figure out my young adult life and all the stresses going on with that without really ever respecting the fact that I needed to heal my body, because I had just come off of 2 years of antibiotics and this really tough disease. But of course I was, 18, and I was like, I'm going to go to college. I'm not going to let this illness stop me any longer. I'm going to live my life. So then, doing all these things, my body made it through, kept me going. And then it was the intermittent fasting, and I just crashed. I became so hypothyroid, hypoglycemic, I was a mess. And then I went through a whole period of trying to get diagnosed with hypothyroid. And I had the whole list of symptoms. I'm going, my body temperature is like 96 degrees. I'm cold all the time in the middle of August. I was sleeping for like 16 hours a day, just all the things. Hair was falling out, dry skin, all the things. And I went to my GP, and of course he ran the TSH, called me back. Oh, you're fine. The labs came back fine. And so I was like, well, you're useless. And I ended up, just kind of going on the search. And that's how I finally found the naturopath that I work with now. And he actually is the one that cured my Lyme disease with I don't know if you've heard of the SOT treatment. It's called supportive oligonucleotide therapy. We can talk about that. It's very cool. It's very sciencey. But that was the start of kind of me really taking taking responsibility for my health and really figuring out myself, because I kind of, I'd have had all these experiences where the experts and the white coats, I'm like, please help me. I have all these problems. And then they come back, they're like, well, insurance doesn't cover this, or your labs say that this isn't right. And so, you're actually fine. I'm like, well, I'm not. So I'll just go to this next guy. So that was the beginning of kind of just wading through the pool, kind of undoing all the things from keto, healing my thyroid. And, it's been a long process.
Before we jump into SOT, do you think there's ever a place for antibiotic use? Like if someone's maybe taking spore-based probiotics at the same time, or like, do you regret taking them? Or
I regret I regret how much I took and for so long. But I do think that antibiotics do have a place. I used to be one of those people that was like, I will never touch another antibiotic ever again as long as I live. And now I definitely think that if you're smart about them, you can, Western medicine is cool if you use it in the right way. So I definitely think that sometimes there's a place for antibiotics. After SOT, I did have mycoplasma co-infection. And so I ended up taking antibiotics for like 3 weeks or a month. And I pulsed them. I did like one every 3 days or something like that. And then I was doing probiotics in between. And that was really helpful. And that really helped me get rid of, that infection. But, with Lyme, it's tricky because the way that the Lyme works, if you're not using the right antibiotics in the right way, it just makes it worse, because Lyme is super smart. It behaves very differently than pretty much any other bacteria. And when it comes in contact, especially with a water-soluble antibiotic, which most of them are, it just forms a biofilm. And so you're essentially if you're taking antibiotics just to take them, you're causing the Lyme to just burrow deeper into your system, to hide better from your own immune system. And you're not really going to eradicate it that way. I think the life cycle for Lyme disease, oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't remember this off the top of my head, but it's either 20 days or 60 days. It's a very, very long time. And for most, like strep or flu, their life cycle is like 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So the antibiotics are given based on how often the bacteria is replicating. And because the Lyme has such a long life cycle, that's why you need to be treated for so long with antibiotics, because you're only going to be able to kill the Lyme when it comes out of the cell to replicate. So, it's definitely, I don't think antibiotics are useless, but I think there's a lot of other things that work a lot better. I'll say that. That's
awesome. And we kind of didn't go into like what Lyme is. I guess most people are familiar, but maybe some aren't. Is it primarily from a tick bite? And it's like a corkscrew kind of shape?
Yes, it's a spirochete. So it's the same family as syphilis. And it's like a little corkscrew bacteria. And what's interesting about it is that in like a petri dish, it's a bacteria, but it actually acts more like a virus in the body. So it moves very quickly through your tissues, and it uses your own cells to replicate. So if anybody listening, what they kind of define a virus as is it's almost like a machine that kind of takes over your cell and causes your cell to work against you. And your cell starts, creating these pathogens and emitting these pathogens because of what the bacteria or what the virus is telling your cell to do. So Lyme itself is very interesting, and there's a lot of evidence that it's actually been genetically modified. For anybody listening, I highly recommend reading the book Bitten by Chris Newby. It's, there's just a crazy history behind Lyme disease. There's been a lot of, potential government experiments with using Lyme as a bioweapon. There's all this sketchy stuff that's gone on with the pharmaceutical industry. They tried to make I don't want to say the word, but a smashing for it, and all of those. I know scary words, can't say anymore. So there's a tough history kind of there. And there's definitely, I recommend to anybody listening, if you want to learn more, there's a lot of research that you can go out there and do. Chris Newby's book, Bitten, is fantastic. But it's essentially, it's a very difficult bacteria to fight because it does have that really long life cycle. It's very virulent in the body. It can hide in any tissue. It can be in your bloodstream. It can be in your brain. It can be in your joints, bone marrow. It can go anywhere. And it's tough to eradicate. And based on kind of the evidence that's coming out, it actually hinders your immune system's way of kind of moving through an infection. So your immune system typically will go through like a peak and a valley of going through IgM and having your IgM antibodies turn on when they're facing this bacteria. And then as they face it more, they'll kind of get the sense of, all right, well, this guy is going to be here for a while. We've got to, have a chronic infection on our hands. Then you kind of switch into the IgG. Your IgM antibodies will go down and your IgG antibodies will start to spike. And then eventually, as your immune system takes care of this infection, your IgG antibodies will most likely turn off. For some infections, they stay on for your life. But most of the time, you'll start to see in those tests that your IgG antibodies will turn off. But what happens with Lyme is often people will get stuck in kind of this cycle of your immune system going through these phases of IgM, acute infection, kind of turning the IgM off, and then going into the IgG, chronic infection, going through that, killing the, whatever the rest of the infection is, and those turning off. So there's something that's happened with the Lyme specifically, where your body loses the ability to kind of go through that cycle of your immune system. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's very confusing.
Yeah, no, that was great. Have you looked at immunoglobulin therapy?
Yes. And I did I did colostrum a bunch, and that was when that was not really a thing. And, they did, that was kind of the beginning of talking about that, was that, colostrum has these immunoglobulin factors and all these things. So that was fun, 10 years ago. And now it's really cool now to see where all of these things have gone, because there's just so many more options and higher quality things. You have more choices. 10 years ago, there was not, there was one brand of colostrum. It was called Transfer Factors, and it was like $100 a bottle. So then now you have all these cool things that are definitely, really, really helpful. I think, those like the Just Thrive has that really cool supplement. So I think those can be definitely very helpful. But, you're definitely fighting up against a pretty crazy beast when you take into account that most likely this bug has been altered from what nature intended our bodies to have to face.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So SOT, supportive oligonucleotide therapy. Your website, you said it's also called antisense.
Antisense is kind of what a lot of the research is under. They changed the name recently. The technology is essentially the same, but it's used for a slightly different use. So they've changed the name to supportive oligonucleotide therapy because it's essentially supporting your immune system. But what that is, it's kind of like a genetic therapy almost. They take your blood and they find your specific strain of Lyme disease, or they can do it for several different infections. And they actually developed it. It's from one lab in Greece. It's called RGCC. And they actually initially developed this treatment for cancer. But they found out in the last couple of years that they can use it for some infectious diseases as well. So they take your blood, they find your strain of Lyme. There's dozens and dozens of different strains of Lyme. So like 3 or 4 really popular ones, but there's different species. So they find your species, your strain, and they make a mirror image of the mRNA that would help that bug reproduce in the cell. And then they envelop that mRNA in it's a protein. They envelop the protein in a fake mRNA, and then you get that injected into your body. So this mRNA with the little protein inside that has the mirror image to the real protein that helps the bug replicate gets put into all your cells. It doesn't affect anything else because it's this one protein is just designed to match with the Lyme protein. And because it's the mirror image, it stops the replication and it causes apoptosis in the Lyme, the new Lyme that's going to be created. So essentially it prohibits them from being able to reproduce. So then after, 80 days, when all the Lyme is dead, it will have not been able to reproduce anymore, and you will be Lyme free, according to what should happen.
That's pretty incredible. Wow. Have you ever heard of micropulsing? Because this was like, I was living with my parents like 6 years ago, and I started down like the Bob Beck rabbit hole. One of my mentors, Robert Cassar, and it's essentially like putting small electrical current into your wrist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been proven, like there's a patent on how it actually deactivates viruses, or it stops them from being able to infect other cells. But I'd imagine like if you're just hitting the blood, that's different from this SOT therapy because it's going, it'll hit your liver and it'll go deep into your system, right? Your brain.
Yeah, it definitely, I think the injection, it's like 500 million of these little fake mRNA cells. So, it stays active in your body for, I believe, 6 months. And that's enough time for all those cells to go through all of your tissues and deactivate all of the Lyme. But I do think, what's tough is I think, a lot of the frequency treatments and stuff probably could like cure anything. That's like, I feel like that's really the answer to disease. It's just really tough to find a practitioner and be able to find, the information. Because it's a lot cheaper than pharmaceuticals.
For sure. Yeah. And there's a lot of devices that don't work too, like the Hulda Clark Terminator 2. When I was a teacher, I would just keep that in my pocket and just in the classroom all day, like 6 hours a day. I'd be just on my fingers touching the 2 copper little electrodes, and like no effect. Like I didn't feel anything. I think I even used it for like a year. And then I used this micropulser from Bob Beck, and I got sick within a couple days. So,
wow. That's really cool. I need to look into that for sure. That sounds, I love all the gadgets and all the tech, and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool stuff out there.
Yeah, I think it's like finding the tool that works too,
Yeah.
because you can throw the whole kitchen sink at some condition, but to use something like SOT, what's the success rate on this? Do you know? Like,
Well, so far, I don't know. It hasn't been done very much, and
mm,
my doctor he's a naturopathic doctor, but he primarily works on, immunology and cancer. And the reason he found out about this therapy is because he was using it mostly with his cancer patients. So I think he's now done it on 600 or 700 people. And, there's been maybe 10 that he's had to do, probably not even that many, that he's had to do more than once. And often it's because somebody's been reinfected by their spouse. So now what he recommends to everyone is, if you're going to get tested, get your spouse tested as well. And, potentially your spouse might need an SOT, even if they're not symptomatic, because they might be carrying and they might be able to reinfect you.
hmm. What are the gun laws like there? Is he packing? I hope so. I'll be
Oh
staying
yeah.
protected.
Oh yeah. That I'm from Georgia. So we're all real pro
That's
gun. But it's
good.
that's a real thing. It's tough for these alternative um people who are actually helping people and doing some pretty awesome work. There's been some scary stories I've heard and incidences. So
Yeah, remember was it Dr. Gonzalez, I think, doing the enzyme stuff? I remember years ago, like the enzyme therapy. There was
yeah.
just mysterious deaths in their own homes. Just
Right. Well, you just hear, I mean, I think like vitamin C is one of these things that is just, doctors are going to jail or disappearing, or they, go on a camping trip and wind up dead, and, or their car drives off the road. And you're just like, interesting.
Yeah, I think that's why it's turned into kind of like an echo chamber of like the same information, and that's part of the agenda to keep everyone confused. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, my current belief at the ascorbic acid is it probably has short-term benefits, but the long-term benefits are the harmful aspect with its effects on copper and
Right.
ceruloplasmin.
Well, and that's something that, I've been learning a lot about more recently, because I did for a long time, I did the Myers cocktail IVs that was, the high dose ascorbic acid, B vitamins, and all that stuff. And it definitely helped at that time. But I think what it might have been doing, it might have been slightly suppressing my immune system, kind of like when people see results from taking high doses of vitamin D, they feel better all of a sudden. It's because certain things aren't working the way that they're supposed to. And then doing all those things down the road. And, we can get into this as well, dealing with just horrific symptoms with my reproductive system, with my cycle, being on the copper IUD. And I definitely think just all the things I've done that have depleted copper, and I'm sure vitamin A as well, because my liver definitely was compromised from all the antibiotics. That was a whole rabbit hole in and of itself.
How long did you have the copper IUD?
I think I had it for about 7 years. And I initially got it, and of course, I was on the pill in college, because that's just what you did, right? Like you just got on, an adult woman, you get on the pill. And that was kind of the only option I was given. I turned into a psychopath. I thought I was bipolar. I was on antidepressants because I was really struggling. And finally, I got off the pill and I was like, oh, everything's fine now. Apparently that just was not for me. And then, of course, I was like, well, I need some form of birth control, right? Because an adult woman, you need to be on birth control. And everyone said, your only option is going to be the copper IUD, because that's the only non-hormonal method. So I was like, all right, sign me up. So I got it in. It was extremely painful, and I had pretty bad, like cramping, super heavy periods for like a year. And that's what they tell you. They're like, oh, well, it's probably going to be, you have an adjustment period. And they were all, trying to scare me. They were trying to get me to get the Mirena, which is the hormonal one. Because for some reason, all these gynecologists like the hormones so much. So I got on, I was like, no, it'll be fine. I've dealt with worse. Just give me the copper one. So I got that one, and it really was, that first year kind of sucked. The couple more years were okay. And then I think, kind of like with keto and me becoming hypothyroid, really the issue there, I became vegan, and I was very strictly vegan for about 2 years. And I think it was just the buildup of estrogen over that period of time. I already was depleted in copper from all this other stuff that I've been doing. My liver is already having a hard time from my history. And now I'm vegan, so I'm eating tons of, raw plants. And, I still knew better than to eat tons of soy and these things. But, I'm eating tons of nuts and seeds. And, I started doing the seed cycling and just all the nuts and seeds. I worked for a cashew cheese company. I was eating lots of cashew cheese, all the things. And then I finally just kind of hit a wall there where I was, for about a week out of every month, I was bedridden because I was in such severe pain. And now I have, of course, a pathological fear of going to the hospital and seeing regular doctors. So I just kind of dealt with it. But then I did, I saw a couple different gynecologists, and they said, well, it's probably PCOS, and you're just going to have to get on the birth control pill, which was so frustrating to me because I'm like, well, I haven't had these symptoms before. I've just started experiencing this in the last year. So there's something I'm doing that's wrong, that's causing this, right? Like logically, I'm doing something wrong. And you, as the professional, I expect you to help me figure out what I'm doing wrong so I can fix this problem instead of just throwing me on hormones and throwing a Band-Aid on it and saying that that's, the end all be all. And I was just so frustrated. So that's when I started diving in more with, kind of finding the pro-metabolic community. And, your work has been extremely helpful, and just going through, all right, how do I detox estrogen? Because I was like, all right, I've got that whole list of symptoms, the super heavy periods, the PCOS, extreme pain, all of these things. And, so that's finally, it's been, I've had my IUD out now for probably 6 months. And I'm finally now getting to a point where I have like a regular period. And that really was the answer. Partially, it's a lot of lifestyle changes as well. And, doing things like eating more protein, eating more frequently, just kind of supporting my body, trying to help my body, and just understanding how my hormones work as a woman, how I can help my body produce more progesterone, and protect myself from estrogen, doing the carrot salad, all of those things. I'm finally now kind of 6 months down the road starting to see the benefit from that. And it's been a journey.
Yeah, because the body will make, it's my understanding, cortisol out of progesterone. And
Yeah.
I read Dr. John Lee's book, like Natural Progesterone Therapy, and that was pretty good. But the solution isn't just to take progesterone, right? It's to get your body to make it again.
Right. Well, I tried that. I tried because when I first got into it, I was like, well, clearly I have estrogen dominance. That's where my symptoms are coming from. So I just need to take progesterone. And so for like 2 months, I took progesterone, and absolutely no benefit, nothing happened. So that's kind of when, peel back another layer, and I started learning, when you're under chronic stress. And of course, I had about the most stressful job in the world at this point. I had like crazy abusive boss, like just the most unhealthy work environment you could imagine. So I'm under all this stress. I'm eating a vegan diet. I was extremely orthorexic, bordering on anorexia. I definitely was not eating enough. I was super neurotic about so many things. And that kind of all boiled down to just, being extremely stressed. And it's pregnenolone. It either gets made into cortisol or progesterone. And so, of course, all mine's getting made into cortisol, and I was doing the coffee for breakfast, not supporting my body at all. It's like, it'll be fine. I'm just going to eat candy and drink coffee for everything, and it'll be fine. I don't need protein. I don't need adequate calories. What is that? Psh, don't need that. So yeah, that was, but again, huge learning experience.
Yeah, I did the no protein with black coffee thing, and that's rough.
Yeah.
And yeah, think about how many, probably millions of women that are vegan with the copper IUD or on birth control. It's kind of scary.
Well, and I feel bad because I know so many people that have endometriosis, that have PCOS, or just excruciating periods, and they're having heavy periods every month. That it's super painful. They're having to take days off work, and it's hard to tell people that first of all, it doesn't have to be that way, and it's not supposed to be that way, but also it requires a lot of lifestyle changes, because our lifestyle, and especially I think what we're kind of convinced and brainwashed into as women, it's not supportive to female bodies. And women are very cyclical. We're meant to kind of go ebb and flow throughout the month and have different times of higher productivity. And then when you're around your period, maybe that's a time to like chill a little bit and not have so much stress. But I think we're constantly being, it's all the girl boss and do all the things, and you have to be a professional, and also you have to be a mom, and or maybe not be a mom because having babies is bad or something. Who knows at this point? I don't know what's right anymore. But there's just a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to look a certain way. There's a lot of pressure to be dieting and be extremely fit, which is, and I fell into that. For many years, I did some modeling out in LA. I was in the entertainment industry. I had that head trash of, oh, well, this girl got this job over you because she's skinnier than you. So then I'm just restricting and feeling bad about myself and becoming even more neurotic about food. So it's just this whole mess of all of this head trash, all of this stuff that ultimately ends up, I think, causing women a lot of stress and a lot of confusion over what they're supposed to do. And everyone's looking for that right answer. So I think that's why people fall into the diet dogma, when really, I think we all need to kind of take a step back and look into ourselves and kind of figure out what's best for you, because everyone's coming from a different place. Everyone's in a different environment. They all have a different experience. So you kind of just have to get back in touch with your intuition and kind of figure out, what you need to do in your life.
That's a really great point. Yeah. I've been kind of laughing at the whole macho movement of like, be a man, do your ice bath, your cold shower, eating sugar makes you a wuss. I saw, kind of a prominent carnivore guy basically saying that basically in a recent post. It's like, it's weird. It's like all this outside pressure on what we should be. And I like what you said. It's like context, right? Like where you're at.
Also, it's, why do we need, it's almost like people want to punish themselves. It's, like, why are we doing all of these things that are so inherently stressful when already there's so much stress? Like just even having social media, having email constantly going, you have kids, you have a job. Most people are not, most people have 2-income households now if they have a family. We're not living in the same world that we were living in even 50 years ago. So the fact that you have people who are purposely starving themselves and then, doing an ice bath or doing, I know people who run like 10 miles a day. Like, why are you doing that? Why? So there's so many things, and it's kind of almost this competition of like, how much can I punish myself, more than everyone else? Can I eat less than all the other women around me? Can I be skinnier than all the other women around me? Can I work out more than everyone else? Can I get less sleep than everyone else? It's just weird. And it's like, just love yourself, like love your body and be kind to yourself and, take a load off. You don't need to do what everyone else is doing. Just do what's good for you. I just, love your body, guys. Love your body.
It's a great message. I love it. Well, do you want to get into some of the questions? Because we have quite a few
Yes.
here.
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely.
And I'm sure we could jump off on a few of them. So let's see here. Uh, is copper toxicity a real thing, or is it just a vitamin A deficiency?
Well, that is definitely not something that I'm an expert at. I've actually been learning a lot from East West Healing, Joss Rubin, Real Food Gangsters, Gangstas. They have so many, like so much good information. I love every episode of your show where you have them on. It's just a wealth of information. But I definitely think in learning more about how the copper IUD affects your own copper levels, I do think it probably hinders your ability to make ceruloplasmin to have bioavailable copper because it is competing with your bioavailable copper. It is releasing copper ions. So I do think that that has something to do with it. You can't really find, of course, there's not really a lot of research on that. But just based on my feeling, I do definitely think that it was messing up my copper balance and just my mineral balance in general. And actually, I'm going to go off on a tangent, but what was a couple of really interesting things that I noticed the day I got it taken out, I started dreaming, and I had not dreamed in years, probably 7 years, probably the amount of time. I could not remember the last time I had a dream. And now every single night I have dreams. Every night since I've gotten it removed, I've had dreams. And then another thing is that my hair started to grow. For when I was a kid, my hair grew really fast. And then I was just kind of like, well, maybe it was because of the Lyme or my health or, something. My hair wasn't growing. And as soon as I got it taken out, my hair has grown 4 or 5 inches in like a couple of months since I got it taken out. It's been kind of crazy. So I do think, your minerals have a lot to do with your, they're regulating your internal electrical system. So, especially with the dreaming and stuff, that has to be something going on with my electrical system, with my internal battery, the way that was working. And I do feel like it was kind of blocking my energy circulation somehow. I don't know if that was just because it's literally a copper wire in my body, or if it was because it was dysregulating my copper balance.
That's interesting. Yeah, I know metals are connected with minerals, like on a seesaw.
Yeah.
So like silver and selenium and silica and aluminum. So maybe you had imbalances. And I know the hair is partially like a detoxification system that will pull up metals out of your head.
So I'm imagining now I'm probably having to detox this, foreign copper, these foreign copper ions.
That's interesting. Let me see. Co-infection with Epstein-Barr virus. I've heard that often goes with Lyme, right?
Yes. And that's one thing about Lyme that's also very interesting. I've never met or heard of a single person that only has Lyme disease. There's always some other thing going on. I've tested positive for Epstein-Barr several times in the last 10 years, but I've never been symptomatic because of Epstein-Barr. And there is some doctors will say that sometimes you can test positive for Epstein-Barr if you haven't had it because of the Lyme. So I'm not really sure if I had it. I've also had doctors say, oh, well, you had mono in college and that's why you have Epstein-Barr, but that's fake news. That's not a real thing either. And I definitely didn't have mono. So I don't know if that was a co-infection that I initially had with my initial tick bite and it just didn't show up for a long time. I probably started testing positive for that maybe 4 or 5 years after my initial Lyme infection. But now I don't test positive for it anymore. And I also had Ehrlichia and Bartonella. And those were also things that I didn't really intentionally treat. I was on all these antibiotics. I don't have them anymore. So I don't know if the antibiotics got them or if my own immune system took care of them. One of those two things.
That's awesome. This is an emotionally charged question, I think. Are viruses actually contagious?
Well, um, I don't know. I think this whole year has been a really interesting learning experience, I think, for a lot of us. I do think that viruses are contagious, but I don't think that someone coughing on you is going to give you a sickness.
The droplets.
Right. Because if that was true, and that we can kind of get into the germ versus terrain thing, if it was true that germs caused illness and that was just the end of the story, then every person should be sick equally, no matter what their circumstance. So if you have a plane full of people and 2 people on that plane get the cold and, but the air was circulating, really everyone should have the same symptoms, and, from that germ. So I do think you can catch but then again, are viruses real? And you get down that rabbit hole. Is that a thing? A really good book that I have really enjoyed recently is The Contagion Myth by Sally Fallon and Dr. Cowan. It's hard to find because it has been banned off several things, but you can get it I got it from the publisher. I think it was Simon & Schuster, and it's a great book. And he talks a lot about that stuff. So I think, it's who really knows?
Yeah, it's tough because I think we're all tired of everything being shut down. And so
Yeah.
people just start to get angry and they're like, it's not real at all. And I think there's a balance, even if, I don't agree with the mandated everything that's happening.
Yeah.
But by the way, I just saw Thrift Books. I learned about this website from one of my friends on Instagram, and it's an alternative to Amazon. They actually have the Contagion Myth on there, so it's $22, 50 available. So
it's a great book.
Yeah.
It's a great book.
That's cool.
It explains everything very concisely. It's a quick read, and it opens up a lot of rabbit holes to go down.
That's awesome.
But I think so many people in the alternative space here, we're all kind of frustrated because a lot of us in this space, it's tough because I feel like unless you've gone through the fire and the veil has been pulled back from you, to the point where that these 3-letter agencies are not really out there for your best interest, that the people in the white coats are not actually smarter than you. They're just people. And again, I went through a long time of hating doctors. I don't hate doctors anymore. I think they're great. I think if I chop my arm off, I'd really want to go to the hospital, and I'd be so happy that there were surgeons and doctors. But in terms of getting and staying healthy, that's just not their wheelhouse. So I think a lot of people get frustrated because we're seeing, the free Krispy Kremes and free meal at McDonald's if you get the things. And, everyone's kind of like, well, why don't you just, exercise and eat not McDonald's? And, we'll all have a better chance. So I do think is where the terrain versus germ comes in. I don't think the germ is not real. I think I've probably had the thing probably several times. My day job is in retail. I'm around people all the time. And you see people come in and they've got like 3 masks on and a face shield, and then they go and they try on clothes. And I'm like, if you're that scared, you should just not be at the mall. You don't need to be at the mall. Okay. Like, it's whatever. But I do think, there's some people who get really sick because they have a lot of issues. At one point last year, I had a fever for like 6 hours, and that was probably my version of that. And then it was gone.
Yeah. Random question. Coffee enemas. Did you ever use those during your healing journey?
I have never done a coffee enema. I've done enemas. It's actually on my list of things I want to try. I just wasn't like, I wasn't a huge fan. It's not the most pleasant thing I've ever done in my life. I like drinking coffee a lot. But it is something that I am, I'm one of those people. I'm like, all right, well, if it's not going to kill me, I'll probably try it just so I can see what's up from my own point of view and kind of get my own take on it. But in terms of the research that I've done on it, it seems like a great idea. You can probably talk more to that than I can.
Yeah, I mean, I used to overdo it, and now it's intermittently. And yeah, Adam Bergstrom, he's been on my show multiple times, and he just says oral works the same way, but
Oh,
I think it's different. Because I definitely feel when I drink it orally, I don't feel like that bile kind of
yeah.
release that I feel definitely. I mean, I'll hear it and I'll feel it happening. Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot of benefit. I definitely feel better when I do them, even once a month,
Yeah.
just occasionally, something like that. Um, but I
It's
was
on my
just
list
curious.
of things to try for sure.
Yeah, there's so many or castor oil packs. There's a million things you could do.
Well, that's something I've started implementing more. And, it's just one of those things where I try, because I'm from that mentality of just overdoing to such an extreme. And so now I'm just always trying to make sure that I'm not overdoing, that I'm just doing things that are going to be supportive and not because, I'm not relying on something like a coffee enema to do what I should be getting my ducks in a row with nutrition, with my daily routines. And I think that's really where the big picture is. Do you have your lifestyle in line? And then you can use all of these things like enemas, like coffee, or castor oil packs, supplements, all of these things to help you and to kind of provide support and benefit. But doing that stuff in place of having your lifestyle really solidified is not going to help you.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. I actually, on that note, though, I want to do an experiment with vitamin E and the local cops here because I have a connect, and I think they're always all stressed out. So I'll
Hmm.
probably have a little case study here soon because they're always eating fast food. They're always on the go.
That's
So I'm gonna try to
awesome.
try to dose them on vitamin E.
I think that's a great idea. And I mean, there's stuff too, like I've, bolused your vitamin E for, periods of time just to kind of see, I've done the same thing with sugar where I'm like, I'm just going to eat tons of sugar for like a week and see what happens. So sometimes doing things and, kind of doing little experiments is a lot of fun.
hmm This is another interesting question. If pathogens are helpful, why can they cause severe and permanent damage to the host? So I guess this is coming from maybe the raw primal people. Let's say like parasites or symbiotic organisms and all the bacteria we need and stuff. I don't know if you've looked into that, but I think it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek question.
Yeah, well, I really don't like the raw primal situation. I like cooked food. It tastes better and it makes me happier. And I feel like that is really the metric for what you should be eating. And I always go back to like how did my grandparents and great grandparents eat? I don't think we need to go back to the Paleolithic period to see how we've evolved. I think it's much more reasonable to go back to like our healthiest ancestor that we can remember. My great grandmother lived to be 96 or something, and she was healthy as a horse. She grew all her stuff in a garden. She lived on a farm. She, cooked everything from scratch. And to me, that's more of the answer than kind of jumping through all these hoops, because our systems are different. We've evolved very much since the Paleolithic time. We're living in a completely different environment. Everything is so different. And, often what you say, we are not drinking the same water. We do not have minerals in our soil. So you can't really compare. It's comparing apples to oranges when you're saying, oh, well, thousands of years ago, people ate raw buffalo. Like, okay, cool. But that was the planet was different.
Yeah.
Um, So I think maybe pathogens were symbiotic when we had a better mineral balance. Maybe we were able to, take care of them better. I'm sure our sleep used to be a lot better. We were getting a lot more natural vitamin D. There's just so many things that now I think, you need to do what you can to poison yourself as little as possible, because it is really hard to not get poisoned. So, if you have the ability to do something that lessens your parasitic load, then, do that. And it tastes better.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I was looking at studies the other day of how a lot of intestinal parasites will cause malabsorption, which
Mm-hmm.
just makes sense, right? They're going to eat a
Right.
portion of food, but they also eat metals, which I think is the other side of the argument where they say, oh, they're good because they're cleaning us up. But it's like, is that the way to do it? Because Lyme will actually eat manganese. Is that true?
Yeah. And that's something interesting. And sometimes if that's kind of a way, I think some doctors are starting to figure out that that's a thing. And if you test and someone's really low in manganese, that they might be positive for Lyme. But, you're feeding the Lyme is not good for you in any way. It releases lipopolysaccharides. So it's releasing these endotoxins and these, my naturopath calls them fungal balls, that are a pathogen, or that they're pathogenic. They're not doing you any favors. So they're feeding off manganese. Most other bacteria eat iron. So they're eating these metals, but they're not doing it to help you. They're doing it to feed themselves so they can keep taking over your cells and turning you into a Borg.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy, but Robert Kassar in Hawaii, I've seen him lecture multiple times in person. He's done a lot on parasites, and he always emphasized their poop, their excrement, their feces. People overlook because
Mm-hmm.
obviously they're eating. That means they're going to poop, and that poop, he says, is the extremely
Right.
pathogenic part of
Right.
it.
Well, that happens with Lyme. They form a biofilm, and it's almost like, I always kind of have this metaphor of like the bacteria in my immune system. They're like little army guys or whatever. And what the Lyme is doing is they're basically building a trench where they have these channels where they can bring nutrients in and then excrete toxins. And that is what they're doing. And then they form this little lipid layer around themselves. So your immune system doesn't see them. Antibiotics can't get in through that lipid layer. And so they're hunkering down and they're just pumping out toxins into your bloodstream, into your tissues. And then, you're seeing people who, have really severe Alzheimer's and die of Alzheimer's. You're seeing Lyme in their brains and their autopsies. You're seeing people have all these joint breakdowns over time that have suffered from chronic Lyme disease. So, just based on that, I definitely don't think doing anyone any favors.
Mhm. Is Lyme related to emotional trauma? Someone asks.
It's an interesting question. I definitely think emotional trauma has a huge role to play in illness in general. Um, I think it's all connected. I don't think that Lyme is caused by emotional trauma. I think often, and I've seen, there's kind of going back to the terrain. Your emotional terrain is part of your terrain. There's tons of people that I've met, that I've talked to, people that I've seen that come in and they have like a very minor, oh, I have some joint pain, or a fertility problem or something like that, something very minor, and they test crazy positive for Lyme, but they would never know, and they're not really experiencing symptoms. And then you have people that, might have a really light load of Lyme and they're bedridden. I think often there's a lot of things that can trigger illness. I think emotional trauma is definitely one of those things where, maybe you have Lyme, you have maybe some other imbalances going on, you're maybe dealing with hypothyroidism, or co-infections, these other things. And then, you have a traumatic event, or, maybe you never thrive really because your childhood was traumatic. So, I think that definitely plays a huge part in your overall healing journey. And that's definitely not something to be overlooked.
That's a great point. How to reduce inflammation in pregnancy, suffering with super sore joints.
Well, the only thing I've ever been pregnant with is like a burrito baby. So I'm not the best person to ask about that. But, reducing inflammation in general, what I've now found after doing all the things, it's really about supporting your liver and just supporting your detox pathways. If you're dealing with joint pain, it's something's going somewhere that it's not supposed to be. So, making sure you're eating frequently enough, making sure you're getting enough protein, and supporting your detox pathways. And then just also, I think moving is really important. I don't think we move enough. Go outside, get some sun, go for walks. And moving doesn't mean you need to like go on the elliptical or do cardio. Just, move around more, get your lymph moving.
That's great. Can someone safely live with a copper IUD? She said she's not ready to give it up. I have heavy flow, but no cramps.
I definitely think, everyone's different. This goes back. Everyone's different. Everyone's in a different situation. What I'm doing now for birth control is the fertility awareness method, which is, I take my temperature every day. I do the ovulation pee strips, and it's a bit of an ordeal. It's definitely not probably for everyone. For me, the pros so far outweighed the cons. The more I've learned about it, it really isn't as hard as I initially thought it was going to be. And it's taught me a lot about my body in general. So I'm happy about that. I think it's something that everyone could do, but not everyone's in a position where they want to change their lifestyle. So I think if you're not having terrible symptoms that are making your life miserable, then keep it. But just recognize that it probably is steering you toward estrogen dominance. So you're going to need to mitigate those factors. There's no way to be perfect. It's like the PUFA argument of like, you can't completely remove every bad thing from your life. You just have to be aware of it so you can kind of mitigate as much as possible in other areas of your life. So if you want to keep your copper IUD and that is really doing great for you, but you have heavy periods, you're probably heading toward estrogen dominance. So eat a carrot salad, do some castor oil packs, make sure you're supporting your liver, eat plenty of protein, get a healthy source of minerals, make sure you're consuming enough salt and potassium and all of these other things that are really important for just your endocrine health, because you're going to have, the copper IUD to deal with.
Yeah, it's a really good point. This is a question that came up for me earlier when we were talking about Lyme, like precautions to take. Because I'm near the backwoods here, and I'll go out and there's likely ticks around, especially during the warmer months. So they're asking precautions to take for ticks for humans and pets or farm animals. I've heard like long sleeve, wide brim hat, kind of tuck in your pants and your boot. Stuff like that.
Definitely, try to keep your skin as a little exposed as possible. Tuck your pants into your socks. They usually go toward like the ends of, tree branches. A lot of times there'll be in dead leaves. So, just try, like if you're going hiking or you're going out somewhere, stay on the path. Because you'll be less likely to kind of brush past one. They don't move very fast, so they kind of have to position themselves on the end of, branches and leaves and sticks and stuff to try to jump onto you. And I believe they're attracted to lactic acid. So when you're, if you're hiking and you're kind of working up a sweat, you've got lactic acid in your body, that's how they kind of sense, okay, there's a human coming, or an animal. And then, if you ever do regular tick checks. So if you are outside, if you work on a farm, you just walked through some tall grass, make sure you're checking right away. If you can get it before it actually digs in and bites you, then you're probably in the clear. And if you do get bit by a tick, save the tick. because you can send it in to get tested, and it's much easier and cheaper to get the tick tested than to get you tested. So if you send your tick away, it's like $40 or $50 to get your tick tested. And then and then you can go to your doctor and you can say, hey, I have this positive tick. I know it bit me. Here's the spot that it bit me. You can be kind of looking for, the bullseye rash or the joint pain, any inflammation, fever, symptoms like that kind of tend to come along. If you do start to develop those symptoms, it's probably a sign you might have Lyme. But then if your, Western blot comes back negative, you can say, well, I probably just haven't made the antibodies yet because I do have this tick and it is positive. So now and you can see the co-infections that it has. And you can do the same thing with your pets. So, that's definitely keep your tick. Put it in a Ziploc bag, you can put it in the freezer, save your tick.
That's a really good tip. I saw this video by Dr. Cass where he used a Protect X. It was like a essential oil spray, like oregano, rosemary, lavender, geranium, cumin seed, lemongrass. And he sprayed it on the tick and it died. And he sprayed it in a line and the tick would not cross the line.
That's awesome. I definitely think, I've used the P73 oregano oil. I think it is just the best stuff ever. I've used that all throughout all of my health problems. I started taking that in 2009. And I think that's great. So, that's probably something that would be great. If you do get a tick bite, use it topically, and then start taking it internally. See if you can kind of get a jump on it. From what I've been told, if you start right away, if you're very proactive, if you get a bite, if you take things like oregano are really helpful. And then if you take, if you can get, I think it's minocycline is the fat soluble version of like a doxycycline antibiotic. And if you can get on that right away, that can sometimes just get rid of it. But a lot of times it's really hard to get that treatment, the day of.
Interesting. The minocycline, can you buy that over the counter?
No. And maybe in different countries it's different. But in the US, I don't think you can. It's in that tetracycline class of antibiotics. But that one is fat soluble. So whereas with doxycycline, which is kind of the general recommended antibiotic, that one is water soluble. So if it comes into contact with the Lyme bacteria, it forms the biofilm, which is a lipid layer. So if you take minocycline, which is fat soluble, it can get through that lipid layer.
Wow, that's a really good point. All right, got to go to Mexico. Pick some
Right.
This is a random question. Has she seen a biological dentist? Have you looked into like teeth health and the metals thing and all that?
I have a great friend who has done a ton of work with biological dentists. She had, what is it called? Not impactions. The thing. What is the thing when you have this empty socket?
Oh, root canal.
I haven't drank enough juice apparently. But yeah, so I'm familiar with it. I don't have any metal in my mouth and I am terrified of dentists. I have not been to a dentist in 15 years. I don't like them. And really, unless I have a tooth rotting out of my face, I probably will never go to a dentist, even a biological one. And that's just me. I'm a crazy person. I have PTSD with doctors. So I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I just, I take really good care of my teeth. I take a lot of vitamin K2. I use, I like what you do with the pearl powder on your teeth, but I do the eggshells, and I make like a tooth powder out of eggshells. And then I use the P73. I love North American Urban Spices toothpaste, and all of their oral care products are great. And I just try to take really good care of my teeth because I hate dentists.
I'm the same way. Yeah. And I think it's more internal than external. From what I understand, kind of similar to the skin, right? It's not necessarily what you put on them, but you can get some benefit, but it's more an inside out kind of deal.
Right. Well, as soon as I learned about, it was, years ago, I read the calcium vitamin K2 paradox, which is another great book. Highly recommend. And there have been several times where I've felt a cavity kind of forming, or I've had like some tooth pain, and I just bolus K2 for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then it's gone. And I don't feel it ever again. I don't ever have any issues. So if I ever am feeling kind of like maybe I'm having some tooth pain or any issues, I just take tons of K2. And sometimes I'll do like coconut oil pulling. That often helps. Or I use the oregano juice as a mouthwash, and that's great,
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great book. I also like the calcium lye. And
Yes.
uh yeah, it's kind of scary. Like for me, looking at the water and like acid rain and tap water and well water and spring water, like that iron calcium overload, like the calcification. And K2 is the counter to that.
Right.
It just, it's interesting looking at all these diseases. Like, are a lot of them coming just from a magnesium and a K2 deficiency? I think so myself, but
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I agree so much with most of the things that you talk about. And just from my experience and, dealing with friends and family, everything is so often, it just comes back to really mineral balance. And just kind of when you start to understand the teeter totter and that kind of everything you do balances out with something else. So even for example, I used to take tons of colloidal silver because I thought, that was going to be the answer to, getting rid of Lyme. And now learning more, I'm like, oh, well, maybe that wasn't the best idea. I still like colloidal silver. I still think it's cool, but now I'm probably not going to take it internally. I think it's great for, disinfecting wounds and stuff like that. But, everything, you just got to be careful with everything because everything kind of has a reaction or a response.
it's a good point. Yeah, I had some crazy experiences with colloidal silver. I think it's definitely smart to know how to make it.
Yeah.
It's a good skill, especially if you're like homesteader or you're outside of the city, because um, those little silver rods, I mean, they'll last forever, especially if you switch them out, because it's like a positive negative thing. Like only
Mhm.
one will kick off the silver into the water, so you just reverse them each time. But yeah, I used to drink that right before bed and in the dark because I was like, oh, silver film. Robert Casar
Mhm.
kind of planted this idea in my mind. The old, get your picture with Santa growing up, and you take the picture and it's black and then it blows up and you can
Yep.
see the picture. Supposedly that's how silver is. And so I was like, that makes sense. Light kind of activates it. And so I want to do it in the dark. I
Right.
would feel like a crazy electrical tickling sensation going down while I was drinking it.
Wow.
I'd turn off the light and then drink down it. Maybe just a cup or so. Just take a swig.
You're tripping on silver. But you had some
Yeah.
crazy dreams.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's probably why I went like pretty hardcore pescatarian too, to balance it out with the selenium
Yeah.
intuitively. I'm just like, I need oysters.
Well, it's so interesting how, your cravings really do tell you a lot. So that's something to, pay attention to if you're all of a sudden craving a lot of, salt or something like that. That was me when I was keto. I couldn't, I would put like a teaspoon of salt in every glass of water I drank. I would eat the flake salt like potato chips. It was because my adrenals probably were freaking out. I was, what is it, aldosterone or whatever is being majorly produced. So, you know, all the fun
Yeah.
things we get into.
Yeah, because you often hear like magnesium goes first under stress, but sodium and potassium are overlooked because those also go under stress as well.
Right.
Um, and so just increasing your salt intake could really help your metabolism, right?
Right. Well, and that's another
Mhm.
thing that, we're all taught that salt is so bad. Um, and then, even if you are beyond that level of salt is bad, and you're like, okay, I should have salt. Most salt is terrible. Or you're doing tons of Himalayan salt, which has, a bunch of inorganic minerals and iron. And, so it's that way with everything. There's always another layer. So you're just always on this journey, always learning. And you just kind of have to do your best and keep learning.
Mhm. Did you ever do any like crazy detox protocols? Like I remember one night I almost did the gallbladder flush with like magnesium sulfate orally and grapefruit juice. Fortunately, I didn't
Oh,
go through with
wow.
it.
I mean, I definitely did. I mean, I've done so many because, for a long time I was super hypothyroid. And so, of course, usually that comes with extreme constipation. So I definitely did so many, I would be drinking the bentonite clay and doing the psyllium husk and doing enemas and what else? I mean, I did a bunch of those things and ended up just feeling terrible, um, depleted. Yeah, just not, I didn't really feel like I was ever getting a benefit, but then, I'd be like, well, at least I pooped. So I guess that's a good thing, but it wasn't really fixing any problems.
Hmm. Did you ever go in the sauna, like the dry sauna
I love
during vacation?
saunas. I love infrared saunas. I want one. One day it's on my list. But I think those are great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the metals, it's amazing. I definitely feel the difference when I do it. Um, this is an interesting question from someone. Why does acne go away when one cuts out dairy? They thought dairy caused inflammation in the body. Um, do you think it's like a lactase thing?
Well, it it depends. I mean, it could be something different for everyone.
Mhm.
In my experience, I was one of those people that was like, dairy is terrible. Even before I was vegan, I was like, dairy's just bad for it's mucus forming, it causes inflammation, all the things. And then I started, and actually, what really got me into wanting to drink dairy is that I was really poor. And dairy is just such a nutrient dense food. And so in trying to just nourish myself as much as possible and not having a lot of money to spend, I'm like, well, what is going to give me the most nutrition, the most calories, and the best balance of macronutrients, micronutrients, all these things. Dairy, of course, is one of those things. And I did grow up drinking raw milk, so I'm not afraid of raw milk. Um, but it was one of those things where I've never really been a big dairy person. It took me a long time to introduce dairy and bring it back in. When I first was like, I'm going to drink dairy, I drank a glass of milk and then I broke out in hives. So that was, you have to be patient. You have to make sure that, your liver is working, that you're producing enzymes, that you're producing lactase. I've had to do a lot of gut healing. I don't think my gut could have tolerated dairy right after Lyme, because I do think, I was dealing with candida, I was dealing with leaky gut, IBS, kind of all of those things. I had to work really hard to fix my microbiome. And I think a great way to do that is to eat a lot of diversity. But it took a lot of patience and just intentionally and checking in with myself. And recognizing that it might get a little worse before it gets better. I didn't want to push it past a point where I was really feeling super inflamed, or if I got stomach pain or anything like that, I would kind of take it back. But I really introduced dairy kind of like a supplement, where I would drink like a little shot glass full every day for like 2 months. And then I would, put more in my coffee and start cooking with it a little more and eat some cheese. And I just really slowly brought it back in so I could give my body a chance to acclimate.
That's awesome. I just noticed you have a recipe section on your website.
I'm working on it. Most of my good recipes are on Instagram.
Okay, right on. The breakfast casserole looks pretty good, though. Like you use
It's really
Dr.
good.
Cowan.
It's really good.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, I'll put a link to your website. This was a lot of fun.
This was awesome. I had so much fun talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing all your wisdom and experience. And I'll put a link below to Maddy's Instagram so you can check her out and her website. And do you work with people one-on-one, or?
I don't. I'm actually going to go through the Nutritional Therapy Association school and get certified this coming year. So next year I'll be able to take clients. But right now it's just kind of me sharing my information, hopefully helping people on their journeys.
I love it. Well, we'll have to have you back when that happens.
That'd be great. Well, thank you so much, Matt. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Maddy. Stick around as I close out the show. Thanks so much. That wraps up today's show. I hope you guys learned something. I learned that Lyme releases lipopolysaccharides, aka endotoxin. I found that fascinating. And with something as serious as Lyme disease, I feel like it's a good idea to have a lot of different tools in your tool chest, like SOT. And for me, that's wild P73 oregano and PEMF/Royal Rife frequency therapy and micropulsing with the Bob Beck device. All of those are potential tools in my kit if I were ever to have Lyme disease. And bee venom therapy would probably be the last resort if none of that other stuff worked. But I've met people that have Lyme disease, and it's a serious condition. It definitely screws with their head, their memory, their verbal fluidity, so many different aspects of health. I think like everything else with health, half the battle is just being prepared. So I believe it's really smart to bring systemic enzymes with you on hikes and to bring wild oregano with you. Doesn't take much space in your bag, and those are two broad-acting tools that you can use if you get bit by a venomous snake, or if you get bit by a tick, then you could use the oregano. And I would personally use systemic enzyme therapy if I had venom coursing through my body, which is just simply a protein, an exogenous protein that the enzymes would literally break down. So that's part of my strategy. I used to also carry with me colloidal silver spray, which I've used my homemade stuff before for a mosquito bite, and it stops the itching immediately. I really like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And living outside of the city, I have a lot of different devices here that are largely for first aid use. So if something were to happen, I know how to use the device or what supplement to take, and it gives me peace of mind. And some of them are not very expensive. On my Mitolife Academy private YouTube school, I have a video on micropulsing and what that is. And that's something that's too sensitive to share on a public forum because they'll take videos down, and content that shares this type of therapy. But it's essentially microcurrents of electricity directly into the bloodstream. And you could build it yourself. The schematic is online for free, or you can buy it from a company that I talk about in that Mitolife Academy video, where you can put 50 to 100 microamperes of electricity into your blood, and the patent showed that that will actually deactivate viruses and fungi and mold that are flowing through your system. So where I stand with the whole terrain versus germ theory is a balanced approach in the middle. And I like what Adam Bergstrom said on the previous show, that it's a little bit of both. And I think there's context involved. And to me, obviously, pathogens exist and people can get infected with different things. And so it's kind of a balanced approach, realizing the terrain matters and it is very important. But there also are such thing as pathogens, and they are real. But I'm definitely going to check out The Contagion Myth by Sally Fallon, Morell, and Thomas Cowan. I'm going to put the link below to Thrift Books. Just found out about this website recently as an alternative to Amazon, and I think that that's awesome because they don't need any more money, especially during this whole situation when everyone's home and ordering most of their things online. I'll also put a link below to the book that Maddy referenced called Bitten: The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons by Chris Newby. And in the show notes, I'll put Maddy's website. You can check out her recipes, the SOT resources, and also put her YouTube channel. Recently, she uploaded a video on foraging edible wild plants, which is something that I've been interested in for years. Took a foraging class a few years ago. I used to forage for acorns down in the mountains of Southern California, and I made acorn bars out of them. And it was a whole month-long process of me doing it myself, of soaking them, grinding them. It was like 6 or 7 processing steps. And it makes me laugh when people put down processed food, because a lot of wild, natural foods must be extremely processed to make them edible. One of those foods is called wild rice, which my friend Ben Belty sells with Wild Food Warehouse. And acorns are the same way. There's multiple steps of processing. So in a sense, wild rice is a processed food. Acorns are a processed food, but they're also a wild and a natural food. So I think it's taking away that stigma of processing and realizing that sometimes it's beneficial and even necessary. So my website is matt-blackburn.com, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that. You can check out all of my recommended products, most of which have discount codes. A lot of these things I've been using for years, and I do my best to find smaller companies that aren't being sold on the stock market or whatever, kind of more family-owned operations when I can. Crucial 4 is one of those. Plants Basically on my site, Satchery, Cosma Beauty, Shen Blossom, Fancy Farm. There's so many that are small companies that are just working really hard to create an integrity product. And like I said earlier, supplements and devices are tools. It's really about knowing how and when to use them. That is really half the battle. And to me, water filtration is necessary now. Sweating in a far infrared sauna is necessary now. There's a lot of things, maybe switching out your bed to a metal-free bed, like the one that I have on my website. And I even have the Berkey water filter up there. Why? Because it's good to keep in your closet. Like for what just happened in Texas, everyone ran out of water and they ran out of their bottled water or whatever. $300, it's a peace of mind. You don't open it. You keep it in the box in your closet if something were to happen. And it's not your ideal everyday water filter, but it's definitely better than like a Life Straw or any of those little dinky things, because it'll last you longer in an emergency situation. And ideally, what I'm doing in the next few months, been working at this for over a decade now, going fully off grid and taking back my power in that way, quite literally, because the grid is a pretty sensitive system, the electrical grid. And so many things could take it out, not to be a fearmonger, an electromagnetic pulse, someone could just flip the switch, it could be a coronal mass ejection. In the coming months on the Mitolife Academy, I'm going to be sharing a lot of home videos as I move into my new house of what I do to mitigate. I've already measured the dirty electricity and it was off the chain. It was over 2,000 GS units it's measured as. It's called dirty electricity, and it does change the pH of your saliva. So yes, health is more than food. Shocker. Health is so many things. It's water, it's light, it's magnetism, food, nutrition, diet that everyone's obsessed with. What's the new diet? That is such a small aspect of health. If you're in dirty electricity all the time and you're dealing with digestive issues, then you have to stop and wonder, what are the big contributing factors? And electromagnetic fields, harmful man-made ones, are often overlooked, or just a biohacking thing, or just something to do after you change your nutrition. No, to me, this is more important than food. There are tons of things that are more important than food, like human contact, eye contact, face-to-face communication with another human being instead of just having this box in your face and living in virtual world. There's so many things that affect your health, and food is a small one. Yes, carbohydrates are important. Yes, animal protein's important. But if you're living in an electromagnetic soup across the street from a cell phone tower with 20 Wi-Fi signals and this blue light shining in your face, in your retina, and your retinal pigmented epithelial cells, throwing off your pituitary gland and all of your hormones all the time, then what are you doing? You're taking one step forward and two steps back. So to mitigate a lot of these different things is what I've been educating about through Mitolife. And yes, there are nutrients and heavy metals that affect how your mitochondria make energy, but there are also non-nutrient things that affect how your mitochondria make energy. Even just hard acidic water, aka well water, spring water, tap water, ionized water, all of that will harm the system long term because it's accumulation, whether it's of hard minerals like calcium and iron, which cause calcification and lipofuscinosis. We're getting hit from really every angle. And so to put a little $30, maybe 2 or 3 of them in your bedroom, these Stetzer filters, to kind of quiet the noise that's changing the pH of your saliva and that's throttling your endocrine and your immune system, it sounds worth it to me. So I had Dave Stetzer on my podcast. If you go back and search Dirty Electricity, Mitolife, it should pop up. And Mitolife is my supplement brand. I have several products now. I originally launched a couple years ago with Dissolvidol. That's systemic enzymes, nattokinase and serrapeptase, which act like Pac-Men going through the body, eating exogenous proteins that your body marks as exogenous. And it's in a phthalate-free enteric-coated capsule. So it doesn't open in your stomach. It's a whole routine where you just simply take it on an empty stomach first thing in the morning. And the capsule is designed to survive in a low pH environment like your stomach and open in a high pH environment like your small intestine. So once it reaches the small intestine, the pH is higher, the capsule breaks open, and then these enzymes go into your system, dissolving accumulated scar tissue, which can have profound effects and can cause what's called a Herxheimer reaction or a detoxification healing crisis. So it's really important when you're taking systemic enzymes, either go really low dose, like even 1 a day matters. That would be a 3-month supply for $60, which is very affordable. And you could take more. I personally take 6 upon waking with 10 to 12 ounces of water. And just make sure that you're not drinking spring or well or tap water. Drink reverse osmosis water, the best you can find, filtered water. I always tell people if they can't afford a water system like I have on my website, then just find a water dispenser. And instead of like a big grocery store, like a Vons or whatever, find a health food store. Usually they're going to have a better water filtration unit, and you bring your 5-gallon jugs. I did this for several years, and you fill up. And I would fill up once a week. I would get maybe 30 gallons. And I lived with roommates, and I was sharing it with them. I was just providing that service, and it makes such a difference because the water you drink becomes your blood. Again, this is something that to me is more important than food. So you can check out my products at mitolife.co. I'll have the link below in the show notes for that. And I have a couple new products coming out soon, one of which is a whole food vitamin C product that I'm really excited about. So thank you so much for listening. I release a new episode every Friday. See you next week. Stay supercharged.